I'm here with our local and most knowledgeable expert about rock climbing and canyoneering, Preston Henning. Talk to me first, Preston, about canyoneering. Why should someone come to Moab and have this experience of canyoneering?
Canyoneering is a really unique activity because it combines hiking, something that's really familiar with people, and with rappelling, which is something that maybe people haven't done before. And so it's a really great way to get out, see some really beautiful scenery on the hike. All of our guides are extremely knowledgeable about the local flora and fauna and just the history of the area. So not only will you get a really good rundown of the area that you're traveling through and some facts about Moab, but you also get to challenge yourself with some rappelling as well.
Let's talk for a minute about the experience of rappelling down into the medieval chamber or Phaedra's Grotto and then over Morning Glory Natural Bridge. Tell me a little bit about if someone chooses that experience, what should they expect from start to finish?
Yeah, for sure. So with that trip, we start up in the Sandflats Recreation Area, and then there's about a mile of hiking to the first rappel, which drops you into the medieval chamber or Phaedra's Grotto. And that rappel is about 100 feet long. For the most part, your feet are touching the whole way, so there's no free hang involved. But what's really cool about it is you're dropping into kind of a dark, kind of circular room that's been cut over many, many, many years of flash flooding and water flowing through it. And so the walls are very angular, and there's just a really cool look to it. And it's kind of neat because you kind of get somewhat of like a slot canyon-esque kind of room in a canyon that's really close to Moab.
Yeah. So you first rappel down this into this medieval chamber of Phaedra's Grotto, and then where do you go from there?
So from there, we'll kind of walk out to Morning Glory Natural Bridge. It's a natural bridge because it crosses overflowing water. And then from there, we are rappelling down kind of in between the bridge and the main part of the wall. That rappel is super unique because it's about 100 feet tall, and it is partially free hanging. So for the first 30 or 40 feet, your feet are touching the wall, you're just kind of walking down. But after that, it kind of cuts away into this big cavern, and you're just kind of floating down in your harness, not touching anything. And so it's really, really unique because you've got that free hang to it. And so even if you've rappelled before, most people haven't done a free hanging rappel that's that spectacular. And you're dropping down into Grandstaff Canyon. There's a natural spring that comes out of the water right next to you. And so you also get kind of the peaceful bubbling of the water, and it's extremely pretty going down that one.
Beautiful. So now, once you've made it down that second rappel, you're in Grandstaff Canyon, and then you hike out?
Correct, yeah. You're hiking out. It's about 2.25 miles through Grandstaff Canyon, crossing over the stream that runs through it as well. And it's a really unique trip because you start up on top of Slick Rock, and it's kind of barren, there's not as much plant life, and then you drop into Grandstaff, which is full of trees, full of shrubs, and so it's really neat. You kind of get to see two sides of the desert.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And give me a sense of how much time does it take to get to the trailhead where you start hiking in, and then once you finish at the end of Grandstaff, how long does it take to get back to Moab?
Yeah, so from the Moab Adventure Center, it's about a 15-minute drive up to the trailhead, and it's about the same, about 15 minutes on your way from where we finish back to the Adventure Center.
Okay. And this can be done in the morning or in the late afternoon into evening?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in terms of meeting location, this trip meets at Moab Adventure Center. Do we offer pickups at hotels and campgrounds?
It depends on the season, but we can offer pickups to hotels and campgrounds that are within the Moab area.
Okay, so if someone's staying out at Red Cliffs Lodge, Soror Ranch, a campground along the river, or out at Potash or Cane Creek, those are areas that we wouldn't be doing
Correct,
pickups.
yes.
Okay. Talk to me about kids on this trip. Is there a minimum age?
We do. For canyoneering, the minimum age is 10, just because that's the age where most kids can safely get themselves down the rappel. We've got some options if somebody gets super scared or freezes up, but 10 is kind of the right age where they have the fitness level for 3.5 miles of hiking, and they can kind of get themselves down the rappel most of the time.
Okay. And you mentioned freezing up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What if someone does get to that first rappel and they're secured into their harness, they're ready to go over, and they just they get nervous about heights, they really freeze up? What options do we have at that point?
Yeah, so our best option is some people we can just directly lower them. So instead of them controlling their own speed and lowering themselves using their rappel device, we will just lower them on the safety line. For some people, it gives them a lot of confidence because they're no longer really having to worry about anything. The other option that we can do, and this is kind of our last resort, is we can do what's called a tandem rappel. And so that's where we attach the person to a guide's rappel device, and they basically sit right next to us. The guide's doing most of the work, and the person just gets to ride down next to us. It's more of a last resort option just because it is slower, and there's only a limited amount of people that we can safely tandem with only a couple of guides, but it is an option that we have.
Okay. And I guess the last resort would be somebody's just absolutely not going over the edge. And
Yeah.
they need to make that decision on the first rappel. Because once you've gone down that first one, there's really no way back out.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, if you go down the first rappel, you have to do the second. There's no way to climb out or anything like that. And generally, we like to have people kind of make the decision before the van leaves if they're going to do the trip or not. Just because it really slows things down if we have to hike somebody back to the van with one of the guides, and that just takes away from the rest of the guest experiences.
Yeah.
I personally haven't ever had to hike anybody back to a van, because we do a lot of coaching and things of that nature to get people down. But yeah, if somebody really does freeze up, then that is an option as well.
Will they have, before leaving the Moab Adventure Center, do they have an opportunity to kind of understand how it's going to work? Do they hook up to a harness and
Absolutely.
kind of try what it's going to feel like to rappel?
For sure. Yeah, so our two kind of mechanisms to deal with that. Before we even leave the Adventure Center, we've got a little practice rope. And so we kind of talk through what it's going to feel like to sit in a harness, what you have to do to safely control your descent. And everybody gets an opportunity to give that a shot and kind of see how it feels. That's when we'll also take the opportunity to kind of explain the anchoring situation, some of the safety measures that we have in place to prevent common issues. And then the other thing we do to prevent things like that is before we leave the Adventure Center, we do a safety speech where we go through everything from the itinerary of the trip in detail, talking about what each of the rappels look like, and things of that nature. That way people really have the opportunity to fully understand what they're getting themselves into and ask any questions before we get out and start driving.
Wonderful. You mentioned some of the safety mechanisms that we have in place. Maybe just describe to me how does the setup look with the number of guides you have, how they're positioned, how, kind of someone that's never been canyoneering
sure.
and they're trying to envision how the setup works. Describe that to me.
Yeah, definitely. One of the most unique things about canyoneering with the Adventure Center is we always run with at least two guides. That way we can have a guide on top of the rappel and a guide on the bottom. The person on top is responsible for getting everybody hooked in and is in charge of the safety line. And then the guide on the bottom is in charge of just coaching and kind of directing people where to go down the rappels. And it gives people a lot of confidence because we're not just sending you over the edge. You have somebody that you can listen to and that can give you instructions on the way down. And then the other safety measure that we have in place is we always have some sort of a backup while people are rappelling. The primary way that we do that is with a safety line. So before people even walk over to the edge to get hooked in, they get attached to an independent rope that the guide at the top is belaying with. So when you're walking over to the edge to get hooked in and then all the way down the rappel, you're attached to a rope that the guide is in control of, as well as a rope that you're in control of your own speed. And that way, if the guest needs a break or their hand comes off the rope or anything like that, the guide at the top can stop them very, very easily just by pulling on it. And so it adds a lot of safety margin and it adds a lot of confidence in our guests. The other backup that we might use is called a fireman's belay. And that's where the guide on the bottom is just holding the end of the rope and all they have to do is pull. And it does the same thing as the guest's brake hands pulling the brake. And so that's the other mechanism that we'll use as a backup while people are rappelling.
Okay, wonderful. How long does the experience take in the hole?
Most of the time, those trips last between up to 4.5 to 5 hours. It does depend on the group size, of course. Some trips are as quick as 3. Most trips, I would say, are between 4 and 5.
Okay. How should someone dress for canyoneering?
That's a great question. For the most part, just whatever clothes you're comfortable hiking in. Good sturdy shoes for 3.5 miles of hiking. Depending on how high the stream is and depending on what time of year it is, sometimes there is some water at the bottom of the first rappel, and the stream can be running kind of high. And so it's good to let people know that you could be walking through water and you could be getting your feet wet.
Okay, excellent. Let's talk about bow and arrow canyoneering experience. Walk me through that one from start to finish, and how does it differ?
Yeah, so bow and arrow starts with, it's about 2 miles of hiking total. You start by hiking up from the Poison Spider trailhead. On the way up from that trailhead, there's an opportunity to see some fossilized dinosaur tracks, as well as some petroglyphs in the rock. And we will pass by a Longbow Arch. It's an arch outside of the national park. It's kind of neat to see. And then once we kind of get up to the head of the canyon, that's where we'll stop and put on all of our harnesses and helmets and things like that. From there, you get a really, really great view into the Behind the Rocks Wilderness area. And then from there, we kind of start scrambling down to the rappels. With this route, you do need a little bit more fitness, just because the hiking up is a lot steeper, and the descent down, there's some spots that are a little steep and a little bit loose, where we're going to be doing more butt scooching. We might be using our hands to kind of work our way down. And so it's nice to have a little bit more fitness level just to navigate those portions. From there, we will have 4 rappels ranging from between 15 and 80 feet tall. So the first one is the short one. It's about 15 feet. It's a great way to kind of get your feet wet and kind of feel what it's going to feel like. From there, we will walk out to where the canyon kind of opens up, where we've got the biggest rappel of the day, which is about 80 feet tall. And that one, there's a spot that you can look up and see some petroglyphs as well, high up on the canyon walls. And then from there, we have one more short little scramble section that we'll kind of be using our hands to navigate. And then we've got a short rappel that's about 20 feet tall. And then the final rappel, which drops us out onto Potash Road. That rappel is about 50 feet tall.
How should someone dress for bow and arrow?
For bow and arrow, just wear whatever comfortable hiking clothes you would like. And for that trip, I would highly recommend wearing closed-toed shoes, something like trail runners or hiking boots. Just for the scrambling portion, you want a little bit more protection for your feet.
Okay, and is there any location where you might be getting your feet wet on that trail?
Not on bow and arrow, no.
Okay. Now I know bow and arrow can be a little more exposed in terms of sun exposure compared to the other one.
Yeah.
So if you're doing this trip more in the heat of the summer, how should you prepare for that?
I would say bring, I personally really like to wear long pants and a sun hoodie just because it really helps keep the sun off of me, or bring lots of sunscreen. And just be prepared that trip is typically between 3 and 5 hours, and so just be prepared to be out in the sun for that long. If you're bringing sunscreen, make sure you've got enough to reapply throughout the trip.
Lots of water.
Yep, lots and lots of water,
yeah.
And snacks, which we both provide with the trip.
Okay.
Canyoneering is one of the best things you can do out here because it combines a beautiful hike through gorgeous scenery with a local guide as well as some rappelling. So you get a lot of good information about the history of the area, the flora and the fauna, and beautiful scenery, as well as getting the opportunity to push yourself a little bit, maybe take yourself outside of your comfort zone with some rappelling.